I thought marriage meant safety, until the night I saw my husband in the backyard, under the cover of darkness, digging a coffin. My son stood beside him, holding the flashlight, and then I heard the words that froze me in place. "She'll fit perfectly." He wasn't talking about a stranger. He was talking about me. That moment shattered everything I thought I knew about love, about family, about trust, because what kind of man builds a grave for his wife and whispers the plan into their son's ear? But let me take you back. Because nothing in our life looked unusual. From the outside, we were the family people waved to at Sunday cookouts, the couple who showed up together at PTA meetings, the neighbors who kept their lawn neat and their smiles even neater. Yet behind that manicured grass, underneath the soil of our yard, something was being hidden. And what I discovered buried there was worse than death itself. You're about to hear a story of betrayal so deep it could tear apart a family forever. A story of heartbreak, of secrets stacked layer upon layer, of a woman who thought she knew the man she married, and of the silent revenge that no one, not even he, saw coming. And I want to ask you, if one night you saw a coffin being dug for you, right in your own backyard, by the two people you trusted most, what would you do? Would you run? Would you confront them? Or would you wait, watch, and play the long game, knowing that the truth might destroy everyone involved? This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about survival. It's about finding strength when every sign tells you you're already defeated. And it begins with a coffin, but ends with something far more devastating. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reached. Don't just watch silently. Your support keeps stories like this alive. They say a happy home is built on trust, but I learned the hard way that trust can be nothing more than a curtain. And behind mine, the stage was already set for something I never saw coming. From the outside, my life looked ordinary. I cooked dinners every night. Simple meals like chicken pot pie on weekdays and a roast on Sundays, the kind of food that filled the house with the smell of comfort. I folded laundry at the kitchen table while the TV hummed in the background, pairing socks and stacking neatly pressed shirts for a husband I believed was working long hours to provide for us. My phone buzzed with grocery list reminders, milk, bread, apples, and I texted Mark asking if he wanted me to pick up his favorite coffee beans on the way home from Target. That was our rhythm. The life people assumed we had. Mark, my husband of nearly 20 years, was well known in town. People saw him shaking hands after church, volunteering at community events, smiling at Little League games. He had the kind of charm that made strangers trust him on first meeting. But when the front door closed at night, his warmth cooled. Conversations that should have been soft became clipped. His presence filled the house, yet he felt absent, like a shadow passing through his own home. It began with small things. Things most wives might not notice at first. Mark became protective of his phone. At night when I thought he was scrolling through the news, I caught the glow of the screen disappear the moment I walked into the room. Once, I woke up around midnight and saw him on the edge of the bed, deleting something quickly before sliding under the sheets. When I asked who he had been talking to, he chuckled and brushed it off. "Work, Claire, just work." I wanted to believe him, so I did. At least for a while. Then there were the expenses. At first, a charge here or there didn't raise alarms. A receipt from a restaurant I hadn't been to, a purchase at a store where I didn't shop. When I asked, he waved his hand and said it was nothing. Just business, just errands. But the pattern grew. Bank statements showed hundreds gone in places I couldn't trace, and every time I pressed for an answer, his temper simmered beneath the surface. "Why are you checking up on me? Don't you trust me?" Those words cut deeper than he knew, because trust had always been the foundation I leaned on. And then there was Ethan. Our son, 16 years old, smart, funny, full of potential. But lately he had grown quiet, retreating to his room after school, headphones on, avoiding the dinner table conversations we used to share. When I asked about his day, he answered in one-word replies. When I knocked on his door, he muttered that he was busy. It felt like my boy was slipping through my fingers, and Mark's influence over him was growing stronger. One night, as I passed their rooms in the hallway, I heard it. A whisper. Low, hushed voices, Mark and Ethan speaking in tones meant to keep me out. I pressed my ear closer to the door, straining to catch the words, but they melted together, broken by muffled laughter. I remember standing there in the dim light of the hallway, heart pounding, wondering why my husband and son were whispering like conspirators. I wanted to push the door open, to demand answers, but instead I walked away, convincing myself I was imagining things. I whispered to myself, maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe it's just father and son talking. But deep down, something in me stirred. A quiet voice warning that I was ignoring the very signs that would one day define my survival. Looking back now, I wish I had listened to that voice. Because those whispers were only the beginning. It was a Thursday evening, and the house was quiet, except for the sound of running water as I stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the dinner plates. The window above the sink looked out toward the backyard, and under the dim light of the porch, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was just the wind stirring the trees. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw Mark. He wasn't alone. Ethan was out there with him, holding a flashlight. Mark's shovel, cut into the ground with slow, deliberate strikes. Dirt lifted and dropped in steady rhythm, the kind of rhythm that told me this wasn't just a patch of soil he was turning for the garden. This was digging with purpose. My hands trembled against the dishcloth. To break the unease building inside me, I reached for my phone and sent a text, keeping it casual, as if I wasn't staring at them through the glass. Need help out there? I waited for his reply. The screen stayed silent. I sent another, a small heart emoji. Nothing. Out in the yard, Mark's back bent lower, and Ethan adjusted the beam of light, their silence more unnerving than words. I wanted to fling the door open, demand to know what they were burying, but something inside me warned, stay quiet, watch. The next morning at breakfast, I set a plate of pancakes in front of Ethan, the way I always had. Normally, he would drown them in syrup, but that morning he pushed the food around his plate, avoiding my eyes. His fork scraped the surface without ever lifting a bite to his mouth. I asked gently, "Rough night?" He shrugged, muttered something about being tired, and retreated upstairs before I could press further. That's when I noticed it. The new lock on the garden shed. Silver, shiny, out of place against the weathered wood of the door. I knew every inch of that yard. I'd planted flowers along the fence, patched holes in the chicken wire, painted the shed's peeling trim. And now there was a lock I had never seen before. Later that day, our neighbor Mrs. Green stopped me as I collected the mail. Her voice carried its usual nosy sweetness as she leaned closer. "Claire, do you and Mark work late on projects? I could have sworn I heard noises in your yard around midnight. Strange sounds like digging." I forced a laugh, told her Mark must be tending to his hobbies. But her words burrowed into my mind. Strange noises, midnight digging, and suddenly the image of that shovel under the porch light returned to me in sharp detail. That evening, when I went to start a load of laundry, I found the shovel propped against the wall of the mudroom. Its metal edge was caked with dark, wet soil. I brushed my fingers over it, dirt crumbling to the floor. I knew this wasn't ordinary gardening. When I confronted Mark, his reaction was swift, his tone sharp. "You're imagining things, Claire. Stop being dramatic. You've always had that problem, turning nothing into something." He said it with such conviction, such confidence, that for a brief moment I wondered if maybe I had made it all up. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was seeing threats where there were none. But the image of my son holding that flashlight kept replaying in my head. The sound of whispers through closed doors. The feel of damp dirt crumbling between my fingers, each denial, each brush-off, left me more alone in my own house. I tried to tell myself marriage was supposed to be about compromise, about patience, about giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. But instead of safety, the walls of my home felt like they were closing in. I moved through the days like a stranger in my own skin, cooking meals no one tasted, folding laundry that no one thanked me for, smiling at neighbors who thought we were perfect. And every time Mark's hand brushed against mine, every time he leaned in with that practiced smile, it felt like I was standing in a trap he had built, carefully, one lie at a time. The whispers, the shovel, the lock, the silence, all of it circled me, pulling tighter and tighter, until I no longer felt like a wife or a mother. I felt like a prisoner standing on ground I no longer trusted, in a marriage that was burying me alive, one secret at a time. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. Every whisper of the wind against the siding felt like a warning. So when I heard footsteps moving outside past midnight, I didn't hesitate. I pulled on a sweater, slipped into my shoes, and crept through the back door without turning on the light. The night was heavy, the kind of silence that amplifies every sound, the rustle of grass beneath my feet, the distant barking of a dog 2 streets away, the faint hum of crickets hidden in the dark. I kept to the shadows, my breath shallow as I moved closer to the edge of the yard. From behind the maple tree near the fence, I saw them. Mark stood in the same spot I had seen him before, shovel planted in the dirt. Ethan was beside him again, flashlight in hand, its narrow beam cutting through the blackness. The hole was deeper now, wide enough to swallow a body. My body, and then I heard it. The words I can never forget. Mark leaned close to our son, his voice low but clear in the stillness. "She'll fit perfectly in there. Soon it'll all be over." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. My stomach clenched, my throat tightened, and the cold night air stung my skin. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that the shiz was me. My husband was planning my end, and he was drawing our son into it. I pressed myself against the tree trunk, praying they wouldn't hear the frantic pounding of my heart. My hands shook so badly, I had to grip the bark to steady myself. The thought of being caught sent chills racing down my spine. If Mark turned his head just slightly, he would see me there watching. For a moment, Ethan lifted the flashlight higher, its beams sweeping dangerously close to where I hid. I held my breath, my chest aching, my nails digging into the rough bark. The light passed over me, missing by inches, before settling back on the hole. I wanted to scream, to run, to shout my son's name, and drag him away from his father. But fear held me still. If I moved, if I revealed myself, it might be the last mistake I ever made. So I stood there, frozen in the dark, forced to listen as the man I had built a life with laid plans for my disappearance. When Mark finally rested the shovel and clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder, I saw my son flinch. Not much, just the smallest recoil, but enough for me to know this wasn't sitting right with him either. And that tiny reaction gave me the strength to back away, to retreat silently toward the house, before they noticed me. Inside, I pressed my back against the closed door, trembling. My mind spun in frantic circles. Do I call the police? Do I confront him outright? What if I'm wrong? What if I sound unhinged and lose everything, including Ethan? Every possibility carried a risk. If I went to the authorities without proof, Mark would turn it against me, paint me as unstable, maybe even unfit to be a mother. If I confronted him, he could twist it, lie again, convince Ethan I was paranoid. And if I stayed silent, I risked the unthinkable, becoming the very thing buried in that yard. Tears stung my eyes as I thought of my son. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for him too. But what if choosing wrong meant losing him forever? I sat in the dark, clutching my knees to my chest, torn between terror and strategy. The house around me felt like an enemy, every wall holding secrets I couldn't touch. My body shook, but my mind began to sharpen. If Mark thought he was the only one playing a game, he was wrong. I couldn't afford mistakes. Not now. That night, lying awake in silence beside the man who might have been plotting my grave, I made a decision. I would no longer wait passively for answers. I would watch. I would listen. And I would gather the truth in a way no denial could erase. Because if Mark was burying a future for me, I would be the one to unearth his. I waited until the house was still. The kind of silence where you can hear your own pulse. Mark's heavy snore rattled faintly from upstairs. Ethan's door was closed tight, a thin strip of light peeking out from underneath, but even that flickered off after a while. That's when I moved. I slipped on gloves, the cheap rubber kind I usually used for scrubbing the bathroom. They stuck awkwardly to my skin, slick with sweat. I grabbed the small flashlight we kept in the junk drawer, and the old shovel propped by the garage door. Every sound felt too loud. The squeak of the door hinge, the crunch of gravel beneath my sneakers. My chest tightened. One mistake, and it was over. The night air wrapped around me, damp and cold. The sky was starless, the moon barely a sliver. I moved across the backyard, each step heavier than the last. Our dog Max stirred in his kennel and let out a sharp bark. My heart jumped into my throat. "Shh," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please, not tonight." He tilted his head but stayed quiet, watching me with eyes that seemed to know too much. The flashlight flickered once, twice, and then steadied. But just as I reached the patch of fresh earth, the neighbor's motion light clicked on, flooding the fence line with a harsh glow. I froze, holding my breath. My mind raced. What if they saw me crouched here, digging in my own yard like a grave robber? What if Mark had warned them to keep an eye on me? My hands shook, but after a tense minute, the light shut off again. I pushed the shovel into the dirt. The sound was muffled, but every strike echoed inside me. The soil was loose but heavy, clumping onto the metal blade, weighing me down. I dug until sweat ran down my back, until blisters formed beneath my gloves, until dirt filled the cracks of my fingernails. Each scoop brought me closer to the truth I wasn't sure I wanted. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed before the shovel hit something solid. A hollow thud. My stomach dropped. I clawed the soil away with my bare hands now, frantic, desperate, until the outline appeared. Wood, smooth, pale, too new to be forgotten debris. A coffin. I sat back on my heels, gasping for breath, staring at it. The box stretched long beneath the earth, almost perfectly sized for me. My throat tightened. What if I'm wrong? What if it's something else? I whispered, but the voice inside me already knew the answer. My fingers trembled as I slid the shovel's edge beneath the lid. I hesitated. If I opened this, I couldn't go back. Whatever was inside would change everything. My marriage, my family, my son. The night pressed in closer, the silence louder than any scream. I forced the lid open, the wood groaning against the hinges, and then I saw. When the lid creaked open, I braced myself for the unthinkable, for the sight of flesh, for the smell of rot, for the undeniable proof that I was moments away from my own grave. But what lay inside wasn't a body. It was worse in a different way. It was the kind of truth that strips you bare, the kind that doesn't kill you instantly but hollows you out from the inside. Neatly stacked inside the coffin were envelopes, thick, sealed, rubber-banded. I pulled one open with shaking hands. Bundles of cash spilled into my lap, crisp bills, all in hundreds, not just one stack, but dozens. My breath caught. Where had he gotten it? Why was it hidden here, underground like contraband? Beside the money was a burner phone, the cheap plastic kind you could pick up at a gas station and discard when you were done. My fingers trembled as I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, and instantly messages flooded the display. Explicit texts. Photos. Her name, Amber. His mistress. I scrolled further, bile rising in my throat as the details sharpened. Plans. Meetings. Promises. Soon she'll be gone, one message read, and it will just be us. No more looking over our shoulders. My knees buckled. The words weren't vague, weren't innocent. They were direct. They were about me. I dug deeper, shoving papers aside, until my hand froze on a manila folder. I pulled it out and opened it under the shaky beam of the flashlight. Inside were medical documents, doctor's reports, lab results, all with my name on them. At first I thought they were my real records. Then I read closer. The details were wrong. Diagnoses I never received, conditions I didn't have, notes that painted me as unwell, unstable, declining. He was rewriting my health, forging an illness into my identity. And then I saw the insurance papers. My name, my policy, but not my beneficiary. His mistress's name was listed where mine should have been. Neatly typed, not scratched in, not an error, a deliberate replacement. If I died on paper or otherwise, she would inherit everything. That coffin wasn't meant to hold my body. It was meant to bury my life on paper, my existence rewritten into lies and silence, hidden away underground, while Mark smiled at church picnics and shook hands at neighborhood barbecues. I sank to my knees in the dirt, my gloves smearing soil across the documents as tears blurred my vision. Every question I'd asked him, every doubt he'd dismissed, every time he'd told me I was dramatic, paranoid, unstable, all of it had been groundwork. He wasn't just gaslighting me. He was laying the foundation to erase me entirely. And Ethan, my sweet boy. I pictured his face as he stood next to his father, shovel in hand, sweat on his brow, believing he was helping with some secret project, some innocent father-son task. He didn't know he was helping to bury me, not in flesh, but in truth. He was helping his father lay me to rest in the only way that mattered legally, socially, financially. Piece by piece, paper by paper, I was being buried alive in lies. I clutched the burner phone, the money, the forged papers against my chest. The weight of them was unbearable. My marriage wasn't just broken, it had been a performance. Every smile, every dinner, every memory of our so-called family life was tainted. He wasn't preparing for a life with me, he was preparing for my absence. In that moment, in the silence of the night, I realized something sharper than betrayal. Mark hadn't been planning a future that included me for years. Every late-night whisper, every strange purchase, every locked shed had been a brick in the wall he was building around my disappearance. I fell backward into the dirt, the stars spinning above me, my heartbeat thundering louder than the cicadas. A laugh escaped me, sharp and broken. Because what else could I do? The man I loved, the father of my son, hadn't just cheated, he hadn't just lied. He had orchestrated my erasure so carefully, so deliberately, that even my child had been drawn into his web. And the cruelest part? No one would believe me if I ran inside right then, and told them, to the world. I'd sound hysterical. To the courts, the forged records would make me look unstable. To my son, I'd seem like the villain tearing apart his family. The truth wasn't enough on its own. I needed more. I needed time. I needed to outthink him. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't just lose my marriage, I'd lose my name, my son, my life. And I promised myself, as I buried the coffin back into the earth with trembling hands, that if Mark thought he was the only one who could play this game, he was wrong. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen, cracking eggs into a skillet, the sizzle filling the room like a mask over the storm raging inside me. Mark walked in, shirt crisp, tie perfectly knotted, lips curling into that smug little smile he thought I didn't notice. He kissed my cheek lightly, as if nothing in the world was wrong. I stirred the eggs, my face calm, my voice steady, my heart pounding so hard I thought the fork in my hand would shake. "Breakfast is almost ready," I said, sliding plates onto the table as though my world hadn't been turned upside down just hours before. Ethan shuffled in, quiet, eyes down, avoiding mine. He didn't know, he couldn't. And for now, I had to keep it that way. I moved through that morning like an actress in a play. I packed Mark's lunch. I reminded Ethan about his history test. I folded laundry. I answered texts from friends about PTA meetings. All the while, inside me I was cataloging every piece of evidence, every forged page, every text message, every dollar stuffed in those envelopes. I wasn't confronting him yet, not until I had a fortress built around me. That afternoon, while Mark was at work and Ethan at school, I drove downtown with the evidence tucked in a tote bag under the passenger seat. My palms were sweating so badly, I had to grip the steering wheel with a towel. I pulled into a lawyer's office I had researched weeks before, back when the first doubts had eaten at me. I hadn't gone then, but now, I walked in, spine straight, voice firm, and I handed the secretary my name. Minutes later, I sat across from a woman in her 50s, her sharp eyes scanning the pile I spread across her desk, the burner phone, the life insurance papers, the forged medical reports. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look away, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Mrs. Lawson, this is enough to take him down." I exhaled for the first time in days. From that moment on, I wasn't alone. My lawyer connected me with investigators, and together we built a case. I photographed everything, every late-night text, every suspicious purchase, every moment Mark thought I wasn't paying attention. I played my role so well he never suspected. I laughed at his jokes. I leaned into his shoulder at church. I asked Ethan about his day, and every night, when they were asleep, I scrolled through that burner phone, collecting his lies, one by one, like beads on a necklace I was stringing together for his noose. Weeks passed, and the plan unfolded quietly. The authorities didn't want confrontation. They wanted him exposed in the open, with no chance to wriggle free. So I waited, patiently, silently. The trap was set for a Saturday afternoon, at a family barbecue in our backyard. I can still smell the smoke from the grill, the sweetness of baked beans in the oven, the laughter of neighbors as they carried folding chairs across the lawn. Mark was in his element, beer in hand, his arm slung casually around Ethan's shoulders, bragging about his new business venture, the one he funded with money no one could trace. Amber, his mistress, was there too, bold enough to attend, sitting at the picnic table with her polished nails tapping against a soda can, her eyes darting to him with a smugness that made my stomach twist. And then it happened. 2 squad cars pulled up, tires crunching on gravel, lights flashing against the trees. The music cut off, conversations hushed. Mark's grin faltered, confusion creasing his brow. Ethan straightened, his soda slipping from his hand. Amber froze, her nails stilling against the can. An officer called out, stepping onto the grass. "You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and falsification of medical records." The words hit like thunder. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mark's face drained of color, his jaw working, his hand tightening on Ethan's shoulder before he let go. "What? This is ridiculous. There must be some mistake," he sputtered, but the officers were already on him, snapping cuffs around his wrists. Neighbors whispered. Friends stared. And Amber, oh Amber, she stood, her mouth opening and closing as the officers rattled off the charges. Her name was spoken aloud, linked to every dirty scheme, every forged page, every message. Whispers swirled like smoke around her, the proud mistress reduced to nothing but shame under the hot gaze of the entire community. And Ethan, my sweet Ethan, he turned to me, his face pale, his voice breaking. "Mom, what's happening?" I knelt in front of him, cupping his face with steady hands. My eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "Your father lied to you. He lied to both of us. But it's over now. It's over." Behind me, Mark was shoved into the back of the squad car, his protests drowned by the murmur of the crowd. The barbecue was ruined, the family shattered, the mask ripped off in one public, irreversible moment. And I stood there in the backyard, the same dirt where he'd once buried the coffin meant for my erasure, watching as justice claimed him instead. When the squad cars pulled away that day, and the smoke from the grill faded into nothing, I was left standing in the backyard with the wreckage of my life, spread out in whispers, stares, and silence. My neighbors avoided eye contact, some out of pity, others out of curiosity, their voices low as they packed up their folding chairs and slipped away. The house that once hosted birthdays, holidays, and Sunday dinners now carried the heavy weight of disgrace. And in the middle of it all stood Ethan, my son, his world torn in two. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed, his face pale, his eyes red from holding back tears. He wouldn't look at me at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was so small it nearly broke me. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know what he was doing." I sat beside him, brushing his hair back from his forehead, the same way I did when he was little. "I know, baby. I know you didn't. He used you, he made you believe you were helping. None of this is your fault." For days, Ethan barely spoke. He avoided the kitchen, skipped meals, locked himself in his room. The guilt sat on his shoulders, pressing him down, making him believe he had been a part of my undoing. Slowly, carefully, I reminded him of the truth, that he was my son, that he was loved, that even in the darkest moment, he had been a victim of his father's manipulation, not his accomplice. It wasn't easy. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But one morning, I woke up to the smell of toast and coffee. Ethan stood in the kitchen, clumsy hands working the toaster, a shy smile tugging at his lips. "Breakfast, Mom," he said softly. And in that moment, I knew the healing had begun. Mark, meanwhile, faced the reality of his actions. The court system unraveled his lies, with the very evidence he thought he'd buried forever. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Each charge carried years behind bars, and though he pleaded, though he tried to twist his words into excuses, no jury could deny the truth. The man who once held power in every room now stood stripped, shackled and silent, a shell of the figure he pretended to be. As for Amber, she vanished. The mistress who once smiled boldly across my backyard disappeared from town, her reputation scorched by exposure, her name whispered with scorn in grocery store aisles, and whispered about at church. She had gambled on a man's lies, and lost everything when those lies were dragged into the light. But me? I stayed. I lived. I rebuilt. Betrayal doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes, it comes with whispers in the dark, with forged papers, with secrets buried beneath your own lawn. It comes in the quiet erosion of trust, in the slow realization that the person lying beside you is plotting your disappearance. And yet in surviving it, I discovered a truth stronger than any betrayal. I wasn't broken. I wasn't erased. I was still here. I kept the coffin. Not underground, not hidden, but propped against the back fence. Empty, silent, a reminder. People ask me why, and I only say this: it isn't a symbol of death, it's a symbol of survival. It's proof that I crawled into the dirt, uncovered the lies, and chose to rise instead of crumble. Sometimes I stand at the window at night, staring out at it, the moonlight catching the edges of its wood, and I ask myself, what would you do if the people you loved the most dug your grave behind your back? Would you let them cover you in dirt? Or would you claw your way out, and make them face the truth? If you're still here watching, that means this story touched you. Don't just scroll away. Give this video a like, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story traveled. Your support means more than you know, because in the end this isn't just my story. It's a reminder sometimes the darkest betrayals can be the beginning of your strongest survival, and survival, that's the story worth telling.